Hey everybody, it's Timothy and welcome to the first episode of Scattered Thoughts. This is a mini cast series where I talk about whatever in the world of magic I feel like talking about, whether that's current events or just something from my own personal experiences that I feel like sharing for the day. We are going to kick this series off with a discussion about Baldur's Gate, and we're going to hone in specifically on the alchemy version of Baldur's Gate because I've been hearing a lot of different opinions, and, I felt like this would be a good place to go ahead and put my opinions out in the ether. So, just to kind of distinguish things for those who may not be in the know, there are two different Baldur's Gate sets. There's the paper release, which I believe has the name Commander Legends Dungeons and Dragons Battle for Baldur's Gate. That is a paper release, came out a couple months ago. It is intended to be a multiplayer draft experience in the same vein as the first Commander Legends that came out a couple years ago. So basically a draft set where you're drafting a commander deck, you're sitting down and you're having a casual limited game with a smaller commander deck. Pretty straightforward focus. It was really fun in my experiences. And when we heard that this was going to be ported over to Magic Arena, which is exclusively a 1v1 experience, we were a little bit skeptical, to say the least. Mainly because how do you port a multiplayer experience over into a 1v1 format? So while advertising, they mentioned that they were going to pour over cards from the main Commander Legends set. They were going to repurpose cards for 1v1, so take the same cards and kind of switch up what they do and how they work so that they make a little bit more sense in a 1v1 environment. And they told us they were going to be adding cards as well, new digital only designs. Now, I'm not exactly an alchemy apologist. I understand alchemy is a hot red button issue for the Magic community right now, and overwhelmingly seems like something that people don't particularly care for. I do think there are positives to it. I do think from a constructed standpoint, which is where I'm not going to be focusing today, there is a lot of detriment to how alchemy has been implemented on Arena. But for the most part, as a cuber, as a limited player, almost exclusively, alchemy has had some positive changes in terms of how I engage with Magic. So while I'm not excusing some of the sloppy designs or untested cards and things like that, I do think there is some merit to these digital-only mechanics, and I found for the most part that they're kind of fun outside of the realm of constructed. We're big cubers in the Jank Diver gaming community, so we get to play with these alchemy cards in our cubes, and for the most part, they are pretty fun, if not a little bit taxing in terms of how much you have to interpret when you're reading some of these cards. But that's not the main focus here. The main focus is on how does Baldur's Gate work on Arena. So for those of you who have been drafting over the past couple weeks, you will know that Alchemy Baldur's Gate is live on Arena, and there seems to be a lot of different opinions voiced out in the ether and on the Twitterverse about whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether it's an improvement over AFR, whether alchemy is destroying Magic, whether this was a good idea to implement, whether there was any reason at all to try and put Commander Legends on Arena for a 1v1 experience. I'm going to go ahead and address that today. And I'm going to keep things mostly positive, although I do definitely have some negatives that I want to voice. But let's go ahead and look at some pros here. So first things first, I loved Commander Legends, the actual paper Commander Legends set. I drafted maybe 5 or 6 times with different people from my local game store, had an absolute blast. I thought the experience was really good. Question is, does that experience translate over into Arena? And ultimately, the answer is a little bit twofold. One, I think the most important thing to recognize when we're addressing this question is that Alchemy Baldur's Gate is basically an entirely different product. Yes, it's using the same art, which we'll get to. It's using a lot of the same cards, but it's more of a mix between AFR, Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, and Alchemy digital-only stuff, and a little bit from Commander Legends than it is a true repurposing of Commander Legends. In fact, a lot of people are rightfully referring to this set as AFR 2.0 or AFR 1.5 because it feels like it's predominantly a retrain of Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, first and foremost, and a repurposing of Commander Legends second. You'll notice while playing or drafting Baldur's Gate that there's a lot of AFR reprints, and a lot of the things that were true of that format are still true here of Alchemy Baldur's Gate. Second, and this is kind of the elephant in the room, if you will, the specialized mechanic, which we'll go a little bit deeper on here, is a little bit problematic in terms of the new player experience. Now, somebody like myself or the professionals out there or, longtime limited players, they see these specialized cards, they see that there are 5 different versions on the back, right? And it's a lot of upkeep to try and parse out what these cards do and how they function. I think they've jumped the shark in terms of complexity when it comes to the specialized mechanic. However, I think it's being greatly exaggerated, the effect that this has in limited gameplay. When you play with these cards, you usually get to narrow things down to just 1 or 2 options, and I've noticed that the specialized creatures kind of boil down to, is the front face playable? If so, good. And can you specialize into the backside? If so, cool, you're getting some sort of extra value. It almost doesn't matter 85-90% of the time which of the specialized versions you can even turn into, as long as you can turn into one, because they all basically amount to extra value on top of the original creature. There are definitely some strategic options that come up here and there, but for the most part, you're just happy to be able to specialize and get whatever extra value the back half of that card holds. Now, that's the perspective of an experienced player. I have to imagine, as a new-time Magic player, maybe this is my second, third limited set that I've ever experienced, this would be a bit much, especially on top of all of the other mechanics that are going on. We have all of the usual alchemy, seek and perpetual, and this and that, and the normal AFR mechanics. There's a lot going on in this set that makes it super complex, even though it's kind of base level core setish like AFR originally was. And I do worry about the new player experience, but I do have to kind of stake a claim here that I actually like the specialized mechanic. I think it plays out really well, and I think the gameplay is improved because of it. It does add a lot of power to the limited format. In other words, if I have a bunch of specialized creatures and my opponent doesn't, I feel pretty confident about my chances to win, but for the most part, I think it's fine. It does feel as though some of the different versions and specializations haven't necessarily been tested. They're kind of throwing stuff at the wall, especially when you have to make all of the cards feel unique from the other ones, and each of the cards has 6 different versions. It gets a little bit jumbled, but for the most part, I do like Specialize, and I do have to throw my 2 cents in there. As a cube creator, that Specialize is actually really interesting for cube because it lets you put gold cards in your monocolored section. Just as a quick aside, being able to use a single slot on a monocolored card that then has a different effect for each of the guilds that you're representing in your cube, I think that's pretty cool design space that we haven't explored before, and I do kind of appreciate what these cards are doing in cube. I do recognize, too, that that's something that most people aren't going to be using to evaluate these cards. Just a single look at a specialized creature, if you haven't played with them, can be a little bit much, and I do recognize that. However, I think the juice is worth the squeeze, if I may use that phrase, because I found the mechanic to actually play out quite well. I think it's unnecessarily complex, but I do think ultimately that it's fun. As far as mechanics are concerned, I also want to give a shout out here to Double Team. This has played out quite well, and I think it's a nice way to try and translate between the paper Commander Legends set and this Alchemy Baldur's Gate set. What they did here is most of the creatures that had Myriad, the Myriad mechanic in the paper product, have been ported over with the Double Team mechanic. And I like that because it kind of preserves that core identity of what those cards were trying to do. Now, if you've never played with the Myriad mechanic, it is a multiplayer mechanic that says whenever a creature with Myriad attacks, you create a copy of it for each other one of your opponents, and those copies attack the opponents, and then they exile at end of combat. But it's a way to spread out your damage in a multiplayer game. It obviously loses any meaningful context in a 1v1 game when you only have one opponent. So obviously it didn't make sense to port Myriad over to Arena, and I think they found a really nice solution with Double Team, which kind of does the same function. Attack with your creature, get copies of it, albeit in a different way. I think they really did preserve the core identity of what Myriad was trying to do in the paper product and ported that over to Double Team, and Double Team plays out very, very well. In fact, I think every single Double Team creature in the set is just good. At any rate, the Double Team mechanic does play out very well for Limited. It's a nice way to get card advantage in an aggressive color that normally doesn't have access to it. I think it's part of what contributes to the aggressive colors being so good in AFR, because it feels like they just never run out of gas. You're always drawn into extra creatures, and it just plays out as a fun, interesting mechanic. Sometimes you have to make these interesting attack decisions to determine whether or not you want your Double Team trigger to go off. There are some kind of neat tricks you can do, like blinking your creature in response to its Double Team trigger to basically preserve Double Team on it and get another crack at it. You can steal your opponent's creatures with a couple effects and then proc their Double Team ability, and they perpetually lose it, but you get the creature. There's some cool things that are involved with it, but it's a nice little bread and butter mechanic that's really easy to understand, especially when placed side by side with Specialize, and it plays out really nicely, even if it probably warps the format in favor of aggressive decks. I do also want to give a shout out to Adventures. Adventures, for the most part, were ported basically one for one from their paper counterpart over to the Arena counterpart, and Adventures are just fun to play with. Again, it's contributing to this kind of long-standing Limited mindset that 2-for-1s and things like that, people should be able to constantly be interacting and have spells. Adventures, just by nature, mean that you have more action throughout a game, and the adventures that are in this set, for the most part, are quite strong. Things like the Blessed Hippogriff, the Dread Lenorm, they're just quite good. The Young Blue Dragon, I found them to play out pretty well, even if there's not a lot of build-around potential outside of one or two cards. It's just nice to have adventures. It's a great mechanic, and it feels appropriate for the setting of a D&D type set. I know when AFR came out, people swore up and down that we would see the party mechanic and that we would see the adventure mechanic come back. I mean, Adventures in the Forgotten Realms did not have adventures as part of the set file, and I think people were really let down by that. So I do think them bringing adventures back was smart. Even if that originated from Commander Legends, they did kind of port over a lot of the cards to the Baldur's Gate set on Arena, and for the most part, those cards remain unchanged and remain just as fun as they were in paper. I do, as a side note, I just mentioned Party. I think they haphazardly threw one or two Party cards in here from the most recent Commander decks that came out alongside Commander Legends. From what I understand, there are only two Party cards. There's Stick Together, which is the board wipe, and then there's the Orzhov Rogue that pumps your team if you have a full party. I do feel like, or at least I can't help but think, that those cards would have been better served in like a historic anthology than actual cards in the set, since there's not really a lot of ways to build around party. It's a little bit tilting when my opponent casts Stick Together and they randomly have like a warrior and I have like a wizard, and nobody was even thinking about that in the first place. It's certainly not something to build towards, and it is very haphazardly thrown into the set, but that's fine. Two more things in terms of positives here. I think from the AFR standpoint, they made a smart decision to remove a lot of the die rolling payoffs from the set. That was one of the perhaps biggest letdowns from original AFR. I know people didn't really like the concept of D20 die rolling and stuff like that, but it was an archetype, and it feels like if you're going to push that archetype in a D&D flavored set, it should be good. And from what I remember, it was just a miserable experience in original AFR. And here there are some of the die rolling cards. They actually included a lot of the new ones from Commander Legends on top of some of the old ones like Earthcall Elemental and the Contact Other Plane. Things like that are still around. They're a little less tilting than they were before, but they're still here. It's just not really a theme of the set. It just happens to be a small feature. They didn't go out of their way to make it super backbreaking if somebody rolled a 20 on one of these cards. Maybe the exception is the giant mythic rare dragons, but I think those are kind of cool at mythic, and they're not necessarily even that good. I've found that those are actually quite fun additions to the set when you're not trying to push this entire build around mechanic of d20 die rolling. Finally, I think the dragons decks are a nice addition here. That wasn't really a feature of Adventures in the Forgotten Realm, but it was a feature of Commander Legends. There's a whole teamer spectrum of dragons, and all three of the teamer 2-color pairs in Alchemy Baldur's Gate are dragon themed. So blue-red dragons, red-green dragons, blue-red dragons. Those are all featured archetypes within the set, and I think they actually work mostly due to the fact that there are actually a lot of cheap dragons, and there's things like the mana rocks that care about dragons. It's actually kind of cool. I've liked drafting these decks. I've liked seeing these decks come together because we've had dragon-based sets before, like Dragons of Tarkir, for example, where they're advertised as this big dragon experience, but there's not really a dragon deck outside of the rares and mythics. I know Iconic Masters gave a crack at this with red-black dragons, and it worked to some degree, but this is the first time I feel like there was an actual dragon archetype that you could draft without having to open multiple mythics or rares. So I do think that's kind of cool as well. And then, I know I said finally already, but finally, they did kind of hammer out some of the color imbalances that were apparent with AFR. It's no mystery that blue was borderline unplayable in AFR, and while it's still not very good in Baldur's Gate, it is at least playable, and there are some thematic things going on like blue-red dragons and blue-white blink that pull it up a little bit. It's clearly last place. It still has some of the kind of weak holdover cards that we saw from AFR. A lot of 2-mana creatures that just don't get the job done in this format, but it does have a few things going for it. I do wonder if maybe they could have swapped a few more things around, like, for example, they brought in Dream Fracture as a cancel variant, but they still maintained You Find the Villain's Lair as another cancel variant. I'm wondering if maybe they could have found a replacement for You Find the Villain's Lair, which is borderline unplayable, and maybe up the viability of blue just a tiny little bit with a couple changes to the AFR cards. Still, I do find that I can win with a blue deck, whereas in AFR, you could not get me to touch a blue deck, even if you paid me. So it is a little bit more balanced. Red-black is not the de facto best thing you can do in the entire format. While it's still good, the Steel and Sack deck is still prevalent. It does feel like there are a lot of contenders, mostly the aggro decks, but also a couple rampy decks and things like that. I find it to be a little more balanced than the initial AFR experience was. Now, with all of the positive stuff out of the way, I do think that it's appropriate to give a couple of the negatives that I've experienced with this format, and a lot of what I think is contributing to people spouting off against this on social media and using it as a torch and pitchfork for Alchemy as a whole. First and foremost, the biggest thing for me is not necessarily the confusion of something like Specialized, but it's the reuse of the art from the original paper set to represent new cards on the digital platform. This to me is just hugely egregious, especially as someone who uses the art to quickly identify what cards do. In case you're not aware, what happened was they took a couple of the cards that had multiplayer abilities from Commander Legends. They redesigned what they do so that, again, they make sense in a 1v1 format, but because they now have different abilities, they changed the name of the card without changing the art on the card. So same art as the paper counterpart, different name, different ability. Even though sometimes the ability is close to what the paper counterpart does, the same art and different name just completely throws things off. And I find it super, super lazy and aggravating to have to remember two different versions of the same cards, especially as somebody who does play Commander in paper a lot and also Arena a lot. I now have to have two different versions of these cards memorized for essentially two different cards that have the same art, and I find that quite egregious. I know they can't necessarily just commission a bunch of art on the fly, but it does raise the question, why make the set if those are the type of compromises that you have to make in order for that set to exist? And that does bring me to kind of my overarching final point here. I'm not quite sure what the purpose of the digital version of this set was meant to be, because from the perspective of somebody who's now played both sets, it feels like it's mostly an excuse to just design more alchemy cards for whatever formats those are legal in. So hear me out about that. You take the paper set, Commander Legends, which at the time that you're designing Alchemy Baldur's Gate, you probably don't have a lot of information or feedback about how players are engaging with that set. Obviously, Alchemy Baldur's Gate would have had to have been in some sort of design stage before Commander Legends even came out. You take that initial set and you tell people that you're going to bring that set to Arena. That's your kind of overarching campaign is, hey, you like Commander Legends? Well, you're going to get that on Arena, even though we're going to tweak it a little bit. I think everybody kind of accepted that, right? But when you take that set and you basically combine it with an old draft format like AFR, and you add just a huge influx, I think it's almost 80 new cards. You add all these new cards on top of the Commander Legends includes and the AFR includes. You just get this kind of mess of a set that is enough different from what people liked about Commander Legends in the first place that it almost feels like we were lied to or the information was skewed. Alchemy Baldur's Gate is not Commander Legends Baldur's Gate. It has a lot of similarities. It reuses a lot of the same cards. It's got a lot of the same themes, but it's more of an AFR remix than it is a Commander Legends remix, especially given that the purpose of Commander Legends originally was to make a limited Commander set, which is something that can't currently exist with the technology we have on Arena. So what was the point of bringing the set to Arena if you had to, for lack of a better term, bastardize it into something completely different? And that's not to say that Baldur's Gate doesn't have some sort of merit to it. I actually find it quite fun to draft, but it's so far divided from what original Commander Legends, the paper set, was meant to be, that it almost feels like this time would have been better used on, say, a remaster set. Shadows over Innistrad remastered, Eldritch Moon remastered. Something like that would have served us much better on Arena than just a ton of new cards mixed with old AFR cards, especially given that AFR, from what I understand, is one of the least popular sets in recent memory. So I do think a little bit was lost in the sauce here, so to speak. We didn't really get Commander Legends on Arena. We got cards with the same art. We got some nice nods to Commander Legends. We even got some of the Commander Legends cards in their entirety added to the platform, but it had to be filled out with so much more that wasn't from Commander Legends that I can't help but wonder if it was a better idea to use this time on something that improves Explorer or historic formats, or something that's already on the client, instead of introducing more alchemy stuff, instead of retraining AFR, or instead of trying to pour over cards from Commander Legends that just don't have a home on the platform. I think it's a pretty big miss in terms of what it was trying to accomplish, even though I do think there are some accomplishments that are perhaps a little bit different than the intended plan. We didn't really get Commander Legends on Arena. We got AFR 2.0 and a couple Commander Legends cards. Now, if there were certain cards that they were just desperate to get onto Arena that were originally printed in Commander Legends, they have historic anthologies for that. They have these new Explorer anthologies coming up. There would have been some tools that they could have put out there to print the important cards from AFR, or rather Commander Legends, on the platform without having to go through the hassle of an entire limited format that, for the most part, is super complex and a little off-putting for newer players. I think they missed the mark quite a bit here, but I do think there is some merit to the actual limited format that we got. And ultimately, as a cube designer, this does mean that there are more options for cube out there, but I, again, understand I'm in the minority when it comes to using that as a silver lining. I understand why people are upset about Alchemy. I understand why they would then be upset about Commander Legends, about Baldur's Gate for Arena, but I guess my final word here is don't hold that against it. Either play the limited format, and if you like it, go ahead and keep playing it. If you don't like it, go ahead and give it a break and work on something else until Dominaria United came out. And whatever you do, don't hold it against the original Commander Legends set. If you haven't had a chance to go out and play, find some friends, get you a booster box, and play Commander Legends in paper, because it was an absolute blast. And unfortunately, a lot of what made that set really fun just doesn't work on Arena. So why did we get the set on Arena? Who can say? Somebody made a decision and we ended up with what we got. At the end of the day, we'll just move on from there, and if you don't like it, we'll wait for the next draft format. That's it for Scattered Thoughts today. Again, my name's Timothy. If you have any topics you want to discuss, feel free to find me on social media. They will be posted wherever you are watching this video. Also, we're a Cube-related community. Come check out the bigger Jank Diver Gaming community with the Discord link wherever you're watching this, and come cube with us. We've got specialized cards. If that's your sort of thing, then Jank Diver Gaming probably has a place for you. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for hanging out. Again, my name's Timothy. This has been episode 1 of Scattered Thoughts. I'll see you next time.